Perfect, perfect,
All
perfect.
right. Okay. I suggest let's get started. It's 05 on my watch. It's 10:05 a.m. in San Francisco. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Szabo. I'm VP of Developer Platform at Virgil Security. And with me, I have a special guest today, Josh Marpet. Josh, do you want to do a quick intro first?
Sure. I've got a bio slide in my section, but this is fine too. Redline is my company. I'm the Chief Operating Officer over at Redline. I am the guy that's done just about everything. I'm an ex-cop and an ex-fireman. I have not been an EMT yet, but I swear one of these days I'll do it just so I have the full trifecta. I was a senior information security analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. I was a blacksmith, a horse dentist. No, I'm not joking. And I've been doing compliance and information security for, well, now the last 10 or 15 years, and computers for the last 20 or 25 years. Yes, I'm old. So Redline as a company is an information security consulting company, a compliance company, a bit of a pen test company, and we help people figure out what's going on and where they're going next. So we work with them to develop their security maturity, their compliance systems, and basically their people and their systems. So where is your next 5 years going? And that's what Redline is all about, to develop that relationship and help them understand what they should be doing, not just to react what they did last year.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's a great intro. And with Josh today, we are going to cover GDPR compliance. And it's an interesting segue between encryption, data security, and compliance. And that's what we're going to cover for you today. About Virgil Security, we are the tech behind Twilio's encrypted messaging. Maybe that's how you heard about us for the first time. We power Twilio's encrypted messaging and end-to-end encrypted chat. And we are not just working with Twilio, but that's how we got famous. We are open source SDKs, end-to-end encrypt anything and everything. We work with other message delivery services and work with other backends and your own app. This is a white paper about HIPAA, which you guys are welcome to download, or if you email me at dave@virgilsecurity.com, I'll also be very happy to share. It's not GDPR, but HIPAA compliancy that explains what Josh will explain on this call about how compliance and data security works with GDPR. Today, I'm here to announce officially that end-to-end encryption is here to stay. It's true. Look at all these chat applications. Probably you guys don't have any chat applications on your phone that is not end-to-end encrypted anymore. End-to-end encryption is this new phenomena that takes security from a whole new angle, encrypting data on the endpoints, on the end devices, leaving the backend services and everything between clueless about what the data is, and this means compliance on backend services. Short summary, what is the difference between a standard app security, HTTPS, and at-rest encryption today and end-to-end encryption? This first graph shows you two devices talking through a backend service. Now you see that the devices encrypt data for the HTTPS traffic, which terminates in the middle, in the backend. In long story short, the backend services, the servers, the databases have the keys to decrypt the data. They see the data, and they need to be responsible of handling that data. On the other hand, end-to-end encryption encrypts data on the device, and it's not sharing the keys with your backend services and your databases. So your backend services don't see patient data, they don't see personal data. They are really clueless about what's happening with the data that you choose to encrypt this way. This new approach really enables a new generation of applications to be built beyond just being compliant. These guys, for example, Cloakroom, Capital Bells, they are using Virgil's open source SDKs to end-to-end encrypt message and chat between politicians in the White House and Capitol Hill. They are the White House and Capitol Hill version of WhatsApp that politicians can use during sessions to chat with each other privately. They are really using end-to-end encryption to enforce the democracy that we should have had in the first place. Hasso-Plattner Institute, Gesundheits Health Cloud in Germany, they're also taking an end-to-end encrypted approach to encrypt healthcare data in Europe for Germany and allow apps to collaborate and share those individual health records, but in an end-to-end encrypted way where the patient owns the keys to their data. Also, another example of how end-to-end encryption is used outside of apps is Sora. They built this intelligent light bulb with this mini computer inserted in the middle of the light bulb. You put this light bulb into your ceiling, maybe 5, 10 of them in your house, and those mini computers use their sensors, movement sensors, sound sensor, light sensors, to get data from you, like how your Alexa does. And they end-to-end encrypt the data. They encrypt the data on that mini computer as soon as the sensor data comes in, and then they decrypt it only on the other devices so that they can speak to each other. It's a new way for IoT, and it's the same as SDK. In the next few minutes, I'd like to explain how end-to-end encryption works before I hand it over to Josh to talk about the legal framework and the compliance side of things. And if you guys have any questions, actually, no, I'll stop now for questions and nurture you to ask me anything. So I'm asking the attendees, you guys maybe just type a line of text into the chat window. Does it make sense so far? Is there anything that you'd like to hear today? Do you have any questions so far to my intro? And if you just type a line to say I'm okay, that's also good too. Just wanted to give you guys the ability to ask questions.
They'll ask questions as they go along. If you can't find the chat window, move your mouse. It's on the bottom next to the chat. Participants and chat button should be down there at least for you. So, feel free to ask questions as we go along as well, okay?
Cool. Yeah. So what is end-to-end encryption? I'll explain end-to-end encryption through a chat example. Here's your chat window, and this is how it works today without using end-to-end encryption. This is how it works today with the standard security options available for your app, HTTPS and data at rest encryption. You have a web front end in your cloud or in your data center, and then you have a database where you store the messages. The way it works today is you send this last message, the payload, the message gets encrypted for HTTPS to bring that payload up to the web front-end server, and then it terminates. And that's where your web front-end will see the data. That's a problem because many data breaches and attacks happen here on the web front-end. Somebody's waiting for the data to be terminated, goes into the memory, into log files. That's how it works. And then your web front-end decides to write that message into the database, so another HTTPS or encrypted channel between the two servers, and then it arrives to the database, and then when the database stores that record or that field for a record in a database, it's using a key to encrypt the entire database file with all data in it. It's called the at-rest encryption, or DAR, data at rest encryption key. Literally, the database uses one single key to encrypt the whole database, and then stores that one single database encryption key next to the database, which is a joke if you think about it. It's like having $1 million door and you keep the key under the pot. This is the standard internet security today, and this is why GDPR compliancy is so hard to achieve, because you need to eliminate all those touch points where data can be exposed. Now, this is how end-to-end encryption works. Same message, same chat application. You have a key on the device or in the browser. That key encrypts that message, and it will be the encrypted message that will go up to your front-end server through HTTPS. And then when it terminates, the HTTPS payload terminates on the server, it remains encrypted because it's always been encrypted. The person who is typing in that chat message has already encrypted it on the client device. And then it goes to the database and it remains encrypted forever until it comes back to the same user or to another user and gets decrypted. And it's the key management that our open source SDK does. If you know anything about private, public keys, if not, I'll explain. The green key is the public key, the pink key is the private key. Your public keys you give out to everybody to encrypt data for you, and then your private key you keep on your device or with yourself to decrypt the data that they sent to you. The public keys, Virgil, we run a service where we expose or publish those public keys of the users. We call them cards. Imagine it as a cloud-based directory service like Active Directory, where users can look up each other's public keys and they can encrypt data for each other. And then the private keys remain on the device. That's the basis of end-to-end encryption. In summary, data is encrypted when it's typed in or when it's created on the device or in the browser, and it remains encrypted throughout that entire journey over the network, onto the front-end servers, into the back-end service, and into the database. Even the database won't be able to see the data. From GDPR's perspective, this is a big help so that you guys don't have to do a lot of work on your backend services to make sure that that data is secure and is protected and so on and so forth. Your backend services, your databases, your cloud services, your servers, your potential hackers, your cloud service provider, or somebody accidentally making a mistake of breaching data out cannot make harm to that data because it's been encrypted from the first moment when it was created. So this very thing helps you guys achieve GDPR compliance much easier by not working on your backend service, by not creating rules and not creating walls around your data, but data remains encrypted forever. So that's the technical side of it. And now back to studio. To Josh, I'm going to hand over to Josh to give us an overview, an intro of GDPR, and also explain how data privacy works from the GDPR's perspective. But before I hand it over to Josh, I'll open up and give you guys a chance to type up questions. And I'll give you half minute to, I'll wait silently and suggest if you guys have any questions you can ask now.
David, while they're doing that, I just want to point one thing out that I think you skipped a little bit. When you use Virgil for end-to-end encryption, one of the things that impressed me was that it's transparent to the end user. If you use PGP cryptography and you're a serious geek and you're doing PGP cryptography, because I do, you have to look up using the MIT key server or one of the key servers. I've got to look up somebody's key. I've got to import their key. I've got to do this. It's a manual process. It's unpleasant. Virgil's process makes it pretty much automatic, and that was what impressed me about it. It's totally transparent to the end user.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good perspective, Josh. Thank you. And also, with Virgil, with any end-to-end encryption tech, the user owns the data. The user has the keys to his own or her own data. So it's technically it's a whole new way and a whole new approach to owning data or just contributing or seeing your own data.
Stealing my thunder, talking about ownership of data. All right, fine, be that way.
So, any questions from the attendees? And type it up. If anything not clear about how end-to-end encryption works on the technical front, just type up, hey, repeat it. Or, hey, this one is not clear.
All right, let's get started. Okay, why don't I get started and we can ask some questions. They can ask some, oh, there we go. Do I lose all query capabilities on my database? Actually, that's a great question. The answer is it depends on how you structure your data. Julian, that's actually something I'll hit in a couple of minutes. So great question. Can I hit that in 2 minutes or so, or 5 minutes or whatever it is? That's a huge big piece of GDPR is about data and all the different things about it. So let's do this. Hang on. There we go. Share screen. Let me hit present. There we go. All right, so GDPR, and GDPR is a big topic, and it's a significant topic in that people are very confused by it. So one of the big things I wanted to do with this presentation was do a little bit of deconfusing. Okay, I know that's not a real word, forgive me, but I wanted to get across some of the basic ideas of GDPR in a way that they made sense and were a little more common sense rule of thumb stuff. Okay, so this is me. I already talked about me. I've done a lot of different things. I was a board member of Hackers for Charity, B-Sides Las Vegas, Cloud Security Alliance. I run an information security conference, B-Sides Delaware. I've been around the block more than once. I was actually at Mach 37 with Mike Wellman and Dimitri Dane, who started Virgil Security, and I was impressed back then with what they did, and I'm still impressed with what they're doing. So Virgil is an amazing company, and we have a lot of fun with them. All right, so we'll move forward. All right, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. I mean, you always get a lot of questions about this. And the questions are things like, isn't that for European Union? Do I care? What do I care about this stuff? Can I ignore it? What's going to happen? What's going to happen if I ignore it? Remember, like if you talk HIPAA, for decades, people ignored HIPAA. Or years rather, people ignored HIPAA. They pay $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever it was and call it a cost of doing business. When the fines jumped to 1.5 million, they were like, okay, this is not a cost of doing business. We got to deal with this now, and a whole long story there. But basically, does anybody care about this? And the answer is, yeah, they do. Well, let's talk about that. Why? Okay, and if my laptop would move, there we go. So let's explain what GDPR is, all right? And we'll talk about why it matters. GDPR is all about information and how the information is processed, stored, transmitted, and used. Now that's an interesting one. That's a very interesting one, okay? Somebody's chatting, hang on.
Yeah. I'm answering questions, Josh.
Oh, good, that's fine, go to town. So, So the personal data processing, the processing of personal data has to be limited to what is necessary for the purposes for which they're processed. You actually have to ask for consent to use data as well. You have to keep the data retention to a minimum. You have to keep personal data up to date. It has to be protected from unauthorized access. I'm not going to read this to you, but the idea is the data has to be carefully structured, carefully stored. You're responsible for that data. You're responsible for allowing people to erase their own data. If you have a breach, you've only got 72 hours to inform and communicate. You better have the processes and procedures in place to actually do that, okay? So it's actually really important that you have all of your systems. Oh, sorry guys, forgive me, but apparently they've caught me and they're on their way to get me now. So I don't know if you could hear the sirens going. Anyway, that's the street outside. So data is important, but do I care? In other words, when's it happening? Well, in a few months. It actually has been in place for a year, 2 years now actually. They started enforcing it on May 25th, okay? So you've only got a limited amount of time. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Wait, does it apply to me? We'll talk about that. But you get the point that this is all about the data. This is all about how it's handled, stored, processed, everything else, all right? So do I care? Like, again, if it's $1,000 a year, can I just pay them and they go away? Well, no, because the fines have to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. It's got to be enough to make you hurt. So they do. The monetary penalties are from 2 to 4% of your total revenue, and the minimum fines are 10 to 20 million euro. That's the minimum. That is not the maximum. That is the minimum. Okay? It's unpleasant. I would say, just to be honest with you, that would dissuade me from screwing this up. You know, just saying. So, okay, what does it mean? Well, here is the table of contents for just about consent. In other words, how does somebody say you can do X to my data? This is just a table of contents for one document about one piece of handling data. It is not a joke. They talk about whether the consent is freely given. If you're their boss, there's an imbalance of power. You can't actually consent properly. How do you get valid consent? How do you get explicit consent? How can you do it electronically? Can a child consent? What about for scientific research? I looked at this table of contents and I said, you know what? This is a great example of showing about the use of data, how important and how granular they are getting. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have a question so far? I will open the chat window and take a look. Long answer. Okay, good. That's fine. And actually, we'll talk about the back end stuff in just a minute. But effectively, this is important. Okay, I think I've given you enough time to at least skim this. Let's move on. Applicability. Does it apply to you? Are you a European Union company? It applies. Are you a non-European Union company with an office in the EU? It applies. How about if I don't have an office in the EU, but I collect and hold data for the buyers of my product or service, including EU-based buyers? Well, yeah, it applies. How about if I'm cloud-based? So there are people in the EU who would use my stuff. Yeah, it applies. So yeah, we got problems, because guess what? It is not territory limited. If you store, hold, process, use data about people in the EU citizens, you're under it, period, end of story. Well, I didn't know that I had people from the EU. Well, if you don't have enough data to tell that they're from the EU, you're probably okay. But if you have their address or their email address or their anything about them, their phone number, and it's an EU phone number, sorry, it applies. If you can reasonably be expected to understand that they are from the EU, it applies to you. And you have choices to make, and we'll talk about those in a second. So how do I make this work? Now remember, this webinar is about end-to-end encryption. So how do I make it work so that I'm not worrying about the data as much? Well, there's two things you can do. You can do anonymization, and you can do pseudonymization, okay? Which is effectively like data masking. It's replacing the data with something that isn't the actual data, but I can flip it back, okay? I can re-individuate the data if I use pseudonymization, all right? But anonymization is I cannot individuate that data ever again. It's impossible. Well, does anything, why would I have these two different methods? If you look at the bottom here, you'll see that Article 6.4e, you can use pseudonymized data for uses beyond the purpose for which the data was originally collected. In other words, even without some consent, I can use this data that's been aggregated, and the individuation of it, it's no longer personally identifiable information. I can use it for all sorts of stuff, scientific research, all kinds of things. So that's great. So that's why there's two different sort of techniques, anonymization and pseudonymization. Does that make sense to everybody? If you have a question about that, hit up the chat window and ask a question. I'm happy to take a look. So far, so good? Fantastic. So what does this mean? Does this mean that I should use encryption? Does that count as anonymization? Does that count as pseudonymization? Well, good question. Because the problem is that I can re-individuate stuff fairly easily. If I get a zip code, gender, and date of birth, I can find who they are. Now, this is based on the US, but I can find who they are. So now we've got a question of, does it matter? Well, let me explain. If I use pseudonymization, like data masking, is it going to hold the data safe during transfer? Not necessarily. Okay. Will encryption? Absolutely. Okay. If I use, how about the static data? Does data masking or pseudonymization work? Yeah, it's secure. Does encryption work? Yes. All right, so the reason that they're different as well is about things like that. Data at rest, or sorry, data at rest is safe for both methods. Data in transit, and I'm using sort of HIPAA terms because people know these and understand these pretty well. So data at rest, data in transit. For data in transit, data masking doesn't work very well because there is a possibility to re-individuate the data. All right, you have not hidden enough of the data to fully de-individuate it. Now, there's one more category here, and this is an interesting one. Can I use the data for applications? When I use data masking, yes, because I have some of the data available to use. Even though I've taken Josh Marpet, my name, and turned it into gibberish, because I've encoded it, I've encrypted it, I've whatever, I can still use my date of birth, I can still use my zip code and various other things to actually do data science or data analytics on. If I encrypt the entire record, yeah, there's no way I can do that, okay, because the entire encrypted record is gibberish, and I'll show you that in just a minute. All right, but this is actually kind of wrong, that last line there, because it depends on how you structure your data. And what David said in the chat, which is that if you look at your data and just encrypt all of it, yeah, you know, you're toasty. You can't use it on the back end for applications because the applications have no actual data, just gibberish. It's effectively random noise to work off of. But if you structure your data properly, it's still possible to do. And we'll get into that in just a second. And David, you can hopefully back me up on that when we get there, okay? So
great.
let me explain this. This is some slides. If you saw the HIPAA webinar, I'm stealing some of my own slides from back then, but it works pretty well. Here's a name, a date of birth, and a social security number in clear text. In other words, unencoded, unencrypted. You get the idea. Here is a encoded text. It's the exact same stuff, all that entire line of text, okay, name, DOB, SSN, but it's encoded in base 64 UTF-8, all right? Excuse me. And then the next line, AES encrypted, is again that exact same line of text, name, Joshua Marpet, DOB, 92673, blah, blah, blah. But it's encrypted with AES and a key. I won't get into that, but that goes back to that private and public keys that David was going on about just a minute ago, okay? So now, what does that mean? Well, base 64 is encoded. It is reversible. It is effectively the same thing as a Caesar cipher, a ROT13 cipher. It means that I take an A, if you look at the left there, right here, I'm actually pointing at my screen. I need to use my mouse. Sorry, forgive me. I'm used to teaching college. Forgive me. So if you take an A, it changes to an N. If you take a B, it changes to an O. So if you look over here, they took the word hello and encoded it. O turns into a B. So the word hello turns into URYYB. It's fairly straightforward to figure out which letters they are. If you've ever had a decoder ring, you know exactly what this is about. Now, base 64 is a little different, but the idea holds true. It is a substitution. And I can take that whole string, starting with TKFNR, and I can decode it back to the original string of letters and numbers, okay? But if you go to encryption, well, as you can see, it's obviously incredibly easy to decrypt. And the answer is no, it's not. This is literally one set, for a very small set, by the way, of encrypting using AES 256, encrypting one set of words. I stole this from Moserware. They're properly attributed on the right here. And it is not easy, and it is not reversible. Oh, dear God, it's not reversible. Well, it is technically reversible if you put a sufficiently strong computer on it and give it about 4 million years, it's reversible. By that point, I'm okay, I don't care. I apologize, but in 4 million years, I really won't care about my encrypted date of birth. Let's just be honest there, okay? So do I have to encrypt everything? And that's the kicker, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, the point is that you can de-identify things by encrypting them. They are not able to be re-individuated unless and until you have the proper key. And those are the keys that David was talking about that Virgil handles the key management of, okay? So let's go past that. Let's talk about how hard is it to be compliant and secure, all right? It's not that hard. Don't freak, I promise, okay? It's not easy, but it's not that hard, and it's a help. What do you mean it's a help, Josh? What are you crazy? It means extra work. It means I've got to do all sorts of stuff. I've got to hire like 20 people. Oh my God, oh my God. Relax, we got this, we'll talk. So it's possible, I promise you it's possible to do, and it's not nearly as hard as you think, all right? basically, you have to be careful. That's most of what GDPR is. Be careful, be transparent, talk to people, and structure your data. Think it through, plan. We're back to de-identification, okay? But let's talk about it this way. What if instead of encoding or encrypting everything, what if I left the year of birth unencoded, unencrypted? What if I did that? Would I still be able to use it for statistical analysis? The answer is yes. And if that's all you need, you cannot re-individuate based on just a year of birth. Okay? You're able to use data if you structure your queries and structure your data before you start. It's much harder to do it afterwards. This is why planning is so vastly important with GDPR. Determine what you're going to ask, determine what you're going to need, and determine who needs access. And you can do this kind of thing all day long. You structure the data so that the research department has access to the date of birth, the medical department has access to any health conditions, the insurance department has access to family trees or accident records. You can give different access to different people, and Virgil is capable of doing that, right, David?
Absolutely.
David?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
He had himself on mute, I'm sure. Sorry. Virgil's able to give keys, decryption keys, to various pieces of data to various departments on the same record. It's totally possible to do. So you don't have to go, okay, everybody gets access to this. You can say Jimmy gets access to that, Johnny gets access to the other thing. No problem. It's easy. All right? So that goes back to what do you have to do to be compliant? You need to understand your data. You need to clearly communicate with your users and your people, your company, how the data is used. Data retention, data use, data collection, data destruction. All of those pieces have to be clearly and transparently communicated. You need to get consent for everything that you do with the data from the user. This also goes back to the user owns the data. Okay, as David said, the user owns their keys. The user owns that data. The user, by the way, has the right to be erased, which means that if they decide, I don't want you to have my data anymore, they have an inherent right to have the data disappeared. Now, there can be consequences to that. You lose access to your medical records. You lose that we stored for you. You can have a copy of them, of course, HIPAA, but you lose access to us having them for you and you being part of the research study because you're no longer in it. Sorry. So there can be ramifications, there can be consequences, but they have control of their data. You have to structure the data to be usable yet secure. You have to have a DPO, a data privacy officer. It doesn't have to be an internal person, it can be an external person. And here's my shameless plug, we do this. Okay? We build policies. This is Red Lion. We build all these things. We do all these things for you. We're an external compliance shop. And it's totally possible to do that. Okay? And it's totally possible to do on a very normal basis. This also helps for marketing. I'm not joking. This will reduce your sales friction. This will make you more attractive, I think is the best word, for companies that are in the EU, for companies that are in countries that are affiliated with the EU, but not necessarily part of it. Brexit is still happening, everybody, okay? So if you're GDPR compliant, Britain's still gonna go, Great Britain and the United Kingdom still gonna go, okay, that's good. We know you're handling data properly. That's good. They're not gonna be in the EU, but they're still gonna have that sort of structure and culture to use the EU regulations, okay? As for policies and procedures, if you think ISO, which a lot of people in this country are very familiar with, if you're ISO 27001, information security and general security controls, and ISO 27018, which is all about individuation of information and how you handle people's information, you're really, really close to GDPR. And that's great, because ISO is very well known in the US. It's very well known in a lot of countries that are affiliated with the US or friends of the US. Excuse me, and it's very, very well respected. So it's a great way to start, okay? And again, why isn't your marketing department using this as, hey, we're ISO compliant, hey, we're GDPR compliant, come talk to us, because we're gonna make, you should be getting clients hand over fist with this stuff. Right now, the gap of people that are GDPR compliant, there's a huge gap. When you use Virgil and you can drop APIs in place in a matter of minutes where you're now communicating the information in encrypted format, when you can structure your data and build your systems so that you actually have control over the data, the users have control over the data, you have control over the data, because you only put decryption keys in for the proper people, for the proper uses, for the proper departments. Well, that's control. Now you actually have control of the data. Now some schmuck who loses their laptop and didn't have it encrypted, guess what? It's okay. The data is encrypted on the laptop and we didn't even have to encrypt his hard drive. Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, it's not as much of a crisis. It's not a problem. You don't have to worry about that 72-hour communication window. The data wasn't breached. It's encrypted. We're good. So I don't want to harp on this. I apologize, but it's possible to do. But GDPR, it requires a good amount of planning, a good amount of understanding of your business workflows, and a good amount of understanding of your technology and your technical workflows, as well as how your technology works. Adding Virgil to the mix makes it a lot easier. And of course, Red Lion would not be upset if you called us to talk to us about how we can help you. So as part of that, we wanted to say thank you. And David should be, as soon as I stop sharing my screen, David will explain how we want to say thank you and go into details on that. So David, take it away.
Thank you, Josh. This is great. So anybody, any questions before we open up for questions? Actually, this is the time to ask questions. So while you are typing up questions, I also wanted to show you guys something. So with Red Lion and Virgil, we worked out a special offer for you guys. If you want 2 hours of GDPR consultancy on us, sign up for at least a business plan, and we'll get you covered. We believe that within 2 hours, you can have a basic idea of how, for your own specific app and for your own specific market and use case, how you can reach the GDPR compliance, and then you can decide to work on it with Josh and the team, or do it on your own. We also have a Slack, actually created a special Slack channel for GDPR questions. If you guys are on our Slack, you can ask your GDPR questions in there. And with that, I'll open up for Q&A, so type it up. If anything comes to your mind, anything was not clear, anything you'd like to discuss, this is now the time.
So I'm going to discuss your answer for a second, David. You talked about how Google and Facebook can't go end-to-end encryption because the core business model is to analyze data. And that's 100% true. But again, you know, even if your core business, whomever you are, if your core business is analyze your user data, it's totally doable if you structure your data properly. So that's the one thing that I wanted to make sure we were clear on. If you're careful with your data, and this requires planning again, you can encrypt data that you might think, wow, we have to encrypt all of that. Not necessarily. Remember, there's a list of things that you have to re-individuate data, to push. I say that is David Szabo's data, okay? And if you don't, if you do less than that, leave it in plain text or leave it in encoded or whatever, you can do that without a problem, and you can still use it for research purposes, okay? So you don't lose all of your query capabilities, but you do have to plan your queries ahead, if that makes sense.
Yep. And if you cannot do end-to-end encryption because of various reasons, you can still protect your data, but it's going to be very expensive to build the infrastructure to protect and secure your data in your backends, in your own hosted environment or in your cloud service.
Yeah, it's more expensive because honestly, most of the time developers have to build that out from scratch. Yep. And whereas Virgil has given basically the APIs are throw some API commands in your code and all of your data is encrypted. It's like, wait, what? Like, no, seriously, that's all it takes. So, but if you have to build your data protection and data encryption from scratch, it's not so much it's money coming out of your pocket. It's money paying your developers to write that. Like, it's ugly as heck, to be honest with you. Any questions about GDPR? Any questions about encryption? Any questions about anything like that? Go ahead. And if not, that's fine.
So in summary, end-to-end encryption is, I don't like to use the word cheap, but it's technically is the cheapest way to be GDPR compliant today. You don't have to worry about your backend service and backend database data protection. If you end-to-end encrypt it on the client devices, you'll reach compliance much easier. Also in the webinar, Josh really nicely explained how you de-identify data and how we use encryption for de-identification, how to reach the technical part of the technical GDPR compliancy by using end-to-end encryption and data de-identification as a result of end-to-end encryption. We also showed you an offer that can help you get started. If you sign up for a business plan, we can continue working on it with Josh, and you'll get 2 hours of GDPR consultancy on us. Also join our Slack. If you're not on our Slack, I'll send you a link to join. You're welcome to ask questions. We built a really nice community of like-minded end-to-end encryptors, Virgil customers, and like-minded individuals. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Dave at virgilsecurity.com. And with that, thank you for your attention, and hopefully we'll continue the discussion. And there is one question.
What's the best way to store the private key on the client side? If you're doing it with Virgil, they take care of that. If you're doing it without Virgil, in a heavily guarded directory, or preferably offline, storing private keys is a real problem, because if you lose your private key, you're in serious trouble. So, for example, I have a PGP private key. I have 4 of them, 3 of which I have lost the private keys to, okay, or keychains rather, 3 of which I've lost the private keys to. It's not fun. They have to be incredibly long, incredibly convoluted. You don't want anybody decrypting it. You know, it's like if your password is password, it's a bad one. So you want to have something a lot longer. So honestly, with Virgil, they handle all of the keys for you. You don't have to worry about the storage. Am I correct, David, or am I?
Yes. So in the basic approach is again, so keep the private keys on the device and use the default keychain for iOS and Android. In the browser, we also have a technique that you can use. Now, the real question is, what do you do when the user switches devices or loses a device? And for that, we are going to release soon a private key backup service that is using a technology that's called Pythia, which derives a large complex key from simple passwords. And it makes brute force attacks really difficult because it's stretched, memory and CPU stretched. So long story short, we'll soon offer a private key backup service that backs up your user device private keys securely in the cloud, but securing it with the user's login password. And again, the encryption keys that will derive from the simple passwords are complex using the technology called Pythia. I'll send you a link where you can sign up for the preview. We're gonna release it in about a month or a month and a half from now.
Julian, does that answer your question? Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Very much appreciate your time. And David's got a lot of great materials and a great offer for you. I strongly recommend that you sign up. If you're a developer, if you have a development team, saving days, weeks, and months of building your own systems, encryption systems, and having it done in minutes to hours, well, that's a lot of money saved and a lot of time and a lot of headache.
Yeah.
So I strongly recommend getting in contact with Dave at virgilsecurity.com and or myself, J. Marpet, at redlion.io, and we're both happy to help you. All right?
Yeah, just as a closing thought, Josh, 2 weeks ago on Developer Week, I met a product manager who from Europe who told me that they just finished their GDPR compliance project and it took them a year of heavy work. So when they learned, when he realized that whole end-to-end, that whole cheap way of end-to-end encrypting data, it was like, oh my God, if we knew this would have been a month-long project. So with that, that's my closing thought. With end-to-end encryption, you can probably reach GDPR compliance in a month or in a matter of months instead of in a year.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Josh, for accepting the invite of being our guest speaker today.
Of course.
And looking forward to working with you guys on that.
Thank you all.
Thank you.